Some years ago, I decided to write a historical crime novel set in the high Arctic, on a series of islets known as the Queen Elizabeth Islands. At the heart of the book lay a small community of island dwellers known as the Inuit. I set the book there because I was excited by the environment. Temperatures of 40 below, snow blizzards and crashing icebergs, polar bears. By the time the book was ready for submission, the publishing world had been overtaken by a storm of soul-searching, manifested in a desire to implement greater diversity, and a less clear-cut mission to ensure that authors had the requisite authority to write about a particular subject. In other words, cultural appropriation was now a buzzword, something that might set off silent tripwires and torpedo book projects. In the end, I decided not to submit the novel. I am not Inuit and have never lived on the Queen Elizabeth Islands. My research was done the old-fashioned way, through books, browsing internet documents and travelogues, and speaking to those who have experienced life in the high Arctic. Others writing such stories have met with greater success. In this video, I will examine instances of cultural appropriation in literature that, in my opinion, have been done well, or at least have achieved widespread acceptance. Today, authors are routinely vilified for writing characters hailing from backgrounds other than their own, with some accusing them of taking the spotlight away from authentic voices. In some cases, this is justified, particularly where authors have been lazy in their research, indulging in stereotypes and otherwise being disrespectful to the truth of the community they are portraying. In other cases, I find it troubling that an author's intent is automatically judged to be malevolent without any evidence for such a judgment, or drowned out by the clamour of those who simply don't want anyone to write outside of their ethnic sandbox. To be clear, this isn't a phenomenon that affects only white writers. Many authors from minority backgrounds feel trapped within their cultural tramlines. They are often expected to write books that make use of their ethnic background. When they stray outside of their designated lane, they too run the risk of finding themselves in the firing line. In January 2019, Chinese-American author Amelie Zhao was all set to launch her young adult fantasy novel Blood Heir. The book depicted an instance of slavery, and Zhao was accused, on social media, of racism, of using the black experience of slavery inappropriately. The accusation snowballed to such an extent that the book's launch was cancelled before it had even had a chance to be judged by the reading market. This sort of reaction is becoming increasingly common. Sometimes the reaction can be justified in light of the genuinely offensive content of an author's work. But at other times, the fire of outrage is stoked on the smallest of pretexts, often by people who haven't read the book. For me, the troubling nature of this so-called cancel culture isn't just that it stops authors from practicing their creed, to imagine, to invent, to create fictional plots using whatever raw material happens to inspire them. The problem is also in the arbitrary nature of the yardsticks being applied. One of my favourite authors is the British writer David Mitchell. Mitchell's fifth novel, The Thousand Autumns of Jacob de Zoet, was set in 18th century Japan. Mitchell is English, but lived in Japan for 8 years. The book was nominated for numerous awards, and few questions were raised about his right to pen such a work. While Mitchell had no Japanese ancestry to call upon, his affinity for Japan and his dedication to researching the novel became legend. But what if he'd spent only a year in Japan, or 3 months? Would he still be allowed to write that novel? The notion that there are invisible gatekeepers out there, judging who can and cannot tell certain stories, is a problematical one. When taken to extremes, cultural vetting is a form of literary censorship, enabled by an age of hypersensitivity and fear. Ultimately, it means writers and the publishing industry will evolve to take less risks. None of this, of course, is intended to suggest that writers may insult or misrepresent another culture, or exploit another culture's history just to make a quick buck. Of course not. Any writer indulging in such shallow, self-serving behaviour deserves to be called out. But the argument against cultural appropriation, if taken to its logical extreme, results in absurdism. No writer could write anything outside of their lived experience. Perhaps this is the right moment to mention a book that, for me at any rate, is an exemplar of cultural appropriation done right. In 1980, an Australian writer named Thomas Keneally walked into the Beverly Hills shop of Poldek Pfefferberg, a Jewish Holocaust survivor. Learning that Keneally was a writer, Pfefferberg insisted on showing him his extensive files on a man named Oskar Schindler, a Nazi Party member who he claimed had helped save the lives of 1,000 Jews, including Pfefferberg, during the war. This then was the seed that led to Keneally's Booker-winning novel, Schindler's Ark, later turned into the Oscar-winning Spielberg film, Schindler's List. Keneally was not Jewish, nor had he any direct experience of the Holocaust to call upon. He wrote a book completely outside of his cultural identity. What he did do was put in the work. He pored over documents, conducted interviews, and even went to Poland with Pfefferberg as his guide to visit Krakow and the sites associated with the Schindler story. He did his homework. I have read the book. It's magnificent, told with brutal honesty, but using the skills of a seasoned writer to bring to life the terrible circumstances described in the novel. Keneally's empathy is there for all to see. Ultimately, the debate over cultural appropriation will rage on for years to come. Not just a matter of who can tell other people's stories, but how it should be done. Increasingly, writers are being accused of appropriation whenever they represent a minority group, no matter how they do so. This has the knock-on effect of scaring away agents, editors, and publishing executives from even considering such work. The circle narrows until we choke off a good chunk of literary endeavour. Again, it should be said that there is nothing wrong with attempting to address the systemic imbalances within the industry. Without checks and balances, the publishing industry has a tendency to choose the easiest option, which means publishing mainstream writers penning stories about people of colour, simply because the industry has an easier time of selling the well-known mainstream writer. Although there are some benefits to this, in that it can help showcase minority characters to a wider audience, it becomes a real problem if these are the only portraits of minority characters that readers are receiving. What I would really like to see is the industry championing writers from different backgrounds, but to then not restrict them by saying, "We will back you, but only so long as you write in your own cultural playpen." A level playing field means everyone has the right to write as they wish, as long as they follow the golden rules. Do your research. Don't indulge in stereotypes. Write with empathy and humility. Present verifiable facts, particularly when tackling matters of identity and cultural history. Put simply, writers should write in a way that reflects cultural appreciation, not cultural misappropriation. Imran Mahmood is a British Asian crime fiction author and criminal barrister. His debut, You Don't Know Me, employed the voice of a young black teenager. Imran states that he chose to write a black character because his book was about the criminal justice system and how it sometimes fails people. He understands that there will be those who challenge his right to tell this story, but he defends the decision he made. It's about respect, says Imran. About listening, remembering, inhabiting a character's life to try and tap into their day-to-day existence with as much authenticity as you can muster. A writer should reach the humanity in a character before trying to tackle historical baggage and issues attached to their ethnicity. He adds that he didn't consciously factor in a white audience for the book, though it did very well with that audience. He says that this indicates a brave new normal for the industry, where all writers can write all sorts of books and they will be judged solely on merit. But to get there, he thinks that publishers need to put marketing budgets behind books featuring such diverse characters. Author Kit DeWall, in an article for the Irish Times entitled "Don't Dip Your Pen in Someone Else's Blood," provides further insight. The issue of writing across cultures is plagued, she tells us, by historical considerations. She warns against stereotyping the other, or using dated imagery, and urges authors to create fully rounded, viable, flawed, sometimes unlikable, but believable and authentic people, not representative of a whole culture, but representative of themselves. Joe Dickinson is a senior editor and publisher at Hodder & Stoughton. Joe recently bought and edited The Last Thing to Burn by Will Dean, a white English author. The book features lead protagonists who are Vietnamese. Jo says that she felt no uncertainty about taking on the book. She based her decision on her reaction as a reader and considered the book a well thought out and engaging crime novel. She did, however, discuss Will's research into his Vietnamese characters, checking that the sensitivity readers he used had given their blessing to the project and that the story had been treated with respect. Sensitivity reads are becoming a formal process at Hachette UK and at many other publishers, she tells us. It's always important when writing from the perspective of the other to ask ourselves what we are trying to accomplish. Kit DeWall tells us that our aim should be not only to write well, but to do no harm along the way, to show by our attitudes and our acknowledgements that we aren't just appropriating, but are seeking to understand. When an author succeeds in doing this, they create a universal piece of fiction, in the sense that readers of all backgrounds will experience similar emotions as they read the book. When I first read Schindler's Ark, I didn't care that Thomas Keneally was not Jewish. It didn't matter that I was not Jewish. What I cared about was the characters Keneally had brought to life, their horrifying plight, their small triumphs, and their ultimate escape from evil. At no point did I feel that Keneally had attempted to fetishize the truth of his characters for the sake of his book. Some might say that it's not up to me to decide this, but the fact that there has been no backlash from the Jewish community suggests that the book conveyed an emotional truth that transcends the ethnicity of its author. In the final video, I'll round up our findings and set out a checklist of recommendations. If you found this video useful, feel free to alert others to this project and to download the written guide that accompanies the series from my website. I would also be extremely grateful if you could spend just 3 minutes filling out the short feedback survey available on my website at vasimkhan.com, where you will also find further resources.